On average, 173 kilos of food are wasted per person per year in the EU. However, food waste numbers differ amongst the EU member states, and each country faces a unique situation. Hence, responses to the challenge of reducing food waste need to be adapted nationally. The European research project Refresh therefore created national networking platforms in 5 countries. The platforms included business partners from food production and retail, as well as policymakers, researchers, and civil society organisations.
One of the surprising things really was just how willing the major retailers and governments were in each of the countries where we tested Refresh to come together. We were able to get them sitting around the table very quickly, much more quickly than was anticipated when the project was put together. Most of the major retailers in Europe have joined one or more of the platforms. So we have Tesco's, Aldi, Metro, Penny. These are huge companies that have been very willing to join and share their information and take action to tackle food waste. We have, beyond the retailers, we've got people like Unilever, Nestle, McDonald's, Albert Heijn, the supermarket in the Netherlands.
For me, as a representative of Penny in the Refresh project, it was very interesting to be part of the discussions. We had very open discussions, and I think it was very helpful that actors of the different supply chain sectors were involved. So we could really get to know the challenges that each sector faces to reduce food waste. And I think that was very helpful. And of course, I had the chance to represent retailers and our problems that we have to reduce food waste.
One of the biggest learning of the forum's work that you can't do this alone. You definitely need all the stakeholders sitting next to your table. In field of food waste prevention, we need the NGOs with the endeavor to change. We need the government that can create a framework to change. We need the companies that have the power to change. We need science that can design and measure the change, and definitely we will need education to constantly fuel the change.
The national platforms set up voluntary agreements and started different pilot activities against food waste. In the Netherlands, for instance, the retailer Jumbo dedicated a whole aisle to products made of surplus food, such as chutneys, soups or sauces. In Spain, Gastrofera, the catering service at the Barcelona Fair, studied its food waste. Reduction measures were implemented thereafter, and the impact was monitored. Although it's difficult to ascertain the impact of single interventions, there were significant reductions in food waste at the trade fairs following this pilot activity. Furthermore, a process of food waste monitoring and prevention has been developed that can be replicated by other catering companies.
So that's the main thing that we learn, to talk about numbers, not about sensations or opinions. For us, the main change, the main thing that we saw was how important it is to quantificate the impact of the leftovers. So that's, for me, was the main thing. We already know that we have food that it's not profit, that it's a leftover, but we never have the quantity. So we start to work and think about how much food we are throwing away or moving to another place. So for me, the main thing was to quantify how much food we waste.
In Germany, a training for more than 800 apprentices of Penny supermarkets took place. They learned how to avoid food waste in the supermarket and at home. Afterwards, 96% of the trainees confirmed that the training had raised their awareness of the issue. Furthermore, Penny held an accompanying apprentice competition and received more than 200 proposals on creative ideas for customers to avoid food waste. In Hungary, the capacity of redistribution channels for surplus food was significantly increased. As a result, the amount of surplus food donations also increased. The measures taken in Hungary aimed at optimising processes and creating links and cooperations between public authorities, private enterprises and non-profit organisations.
When in 2015 the refresh started, we have planned to have a multi-stakeholder in the next conference in the next year. When we planned this multi-stakeholder conference, we have invited the different stakeholders along the food supply chain, and we have posted the news on the medium, and we have got over 1 million hits accumulatively on the medium. So the central government immediately focus on this issue and start to put emphasis on the medium disseminations of Chinese major mediums. For some of the basic methodologies that we can definitely learn from Refresh and from Europe, and for some of the campaigns and how you organize things, that's definitely something we can learn. But what's different is the culture, the habits, and something you have and we don't have, like this labeling, double labeling. It's not a common thing in China. I think there are some very interesting differences also in the Chinese campaign, in that the home appliances like refrigerator companies are super interested in the topic as well, and they are trying to explore the areas or ideas how jointly we could reduce food loss and waste through the product side. And also this catering's engagement, since we have such a big population with a huge influence, I believe the catering business campaign would also be something really interesting to carry out in the following years.
In all of those countries, there was an appetite to work collaboratively in this voluntary way, rather than to make legislative changes. Those countries have very differing social and economic circumstances, and yet we found that with a little bit of adaptability from some core principles, the voluntary approach was well received and effective in each of those countries. One of the great things that we've been able to do in Refresh is distill all the information and experience that we've learned from the piloting of the voluntary agreement approaches into a really simple tool, a blueprint for how to set up a voluntary agreement, which has 5 key stages. Well, the Refresh blueprint is really a process that policymakers can walk through, make sure that if they're considering a voluntary agreement in a country, that all the correct actors are brought around the table, the right governance structure, the right funding is put in place, and the right actions are identified, and that those actions are measured and the results are quantified. That gives you everything you need for a framework for a successful voluntary agreement.
The National Pilot Working Platforms, for example, is an excellent blueprint for member states to set up food waste prevention programs that are effective by developing voluntary agreements and harnessing the power of public-private collaboration to drive food waste from our systems. Refresh workshops and conferences complemented this cooperative way of building solutions by providing innovative and interactive ways of deepening networks across all levels of society.
What's really pleasing is that a number of countries have come forward and said they'll use that blueprint and our experience to set up voluntary agreements in their country. So Sweden, for example, have expressed an interest, Croatia, Greece and Belgium. And in a couple of the Refresh countries, the Netherlands and Germany, it very much looks like the platforms will be continued and turned into national agreements for retailers and business to work together, so that we can see it will have a lasting legacy of action on the ground in multiple countries around Europe and China.